that looks to be working. So, yeah, good evening, everybody. Yes, if you have any questions for Louisa, or do we call him Dr. Hamad or Dr. Jelani, or
just Hamad, please.
Okay. Yeah, any questions for Louisa and Hamad? Type them in the Q&A section as normal, please, and then we'll bring them in as we can. We've had a few submitted prior to the session, which we may also bring in.
But Andy, can we just clarify, when Dr. Hammond's not taking medical questions about ailments or illnesses or anything? Just let's clarify that tonight.
Yeah, that needs quite a long session, couldn't it?
Sorry, it just struck me. I
won't say quicker than getting a GP appointment, because I have to say mine's pretty good. You ring at 8:30 in the morning, you usually get in the same day. So
there we go.
I think both Louisa and Hamad are generally more to do with the medical side of things, and I think it's this evening came about because I attended I'll get this right one day, the regional airspace users working group for the northern part of England at RAF Leeming a couple of months ago. And Louisa did a presentation to that group, which I found fascinating. So I'm rather hoping everybody else is going to find it fascinating. So I think perhaps without further ado, we shall pass to. Have you got anything to say, Mark, before we start?
No, I mean you've done it wonderfully, and I'm really pleased with doing that. Just to say that now I know the pronunciation, Appian Aero. There we go. I'll get both in there as well. So just welcome Hamad and Louisa, and yeah, look forward to this presentation. Thank you both.
Awesome. Well, first of all, thank you very much for hosting us and having us, and for everyone who's joined for joining on this very sunny evening when you could be flying outside. So really appreciate it, and hope, yes, let's absolutely dive into some of the work that we've been doing and some of the future work that we've got going on. And any questions that anyone might have, please just put them into the chat. If they are relevant, then Mark and Andy will hopefully just bring them in at the time, but feel free to ask us anything. We're more than happy. If we can't disclose something, then we'll just have to let you know, but otherwise feel free to ask away. But if I give a quick intro as to who we are, and then we can kick off with the presentation. So yeah, I'm Hamad Jelani. I'm a medical doctor by trade, but I've actually paused my clinical work. I do some work on the side, but I've basically paused my clinical work because I'm full-time on Appian. Appian, we're a healthcare company. We've spun out of the NHS. We're part of the NHS Clinical Entrepreneur Program, which is essentially a workforce development program that supports doctors, nurses, pharmacists, anyone who's working within the NHS that has an idea to create that idea and take it forward. So medic by background, an absolute aviation enthusiast. I've loved aviation since I was a kid. When I was at school, one of my co-founders, Chris, and I, we used to launch rockets, flat pack rockets from the school grounds. We used to fly drones around. We used to dream about one day getting a PPL. So very much the marriage of the two industries. Louisa, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name's Louisa Smith. I'm head of aviation at Appian, and my background is completely the opposite to Hamad. My background's probably aviation related. So I started my career in the Air Force as an RAF air traffic controller, and then I joined NATS, where I was at NATS for about 10 years, and I left NATS as head of research and development there and joined Appian to help with our kind of ambition about bringing drones to the healthcare systems.
Awesome. Bear with me while I quickly bring up the presentation. Can I get a confirmation that you can see everything just fine there?
Everything's good.
That's good.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Let's dive in. Yeah, so as I said, we're a healthcare company. We're a healthcare logistics company. Our mission is to deliver faster, smarter, and greener healthcare. This has come about for a number of reasons. Chris, myself, and Alex, we are the three co-founders of Appian. Chris and myself are doctors by background. Chris is identical to me. We've known each other actually for 12 years, went to the same school, same medical school, same university, and now running the same startup. And Alex is a serial entrepreneur. software software background, and also in healthcare. And together we've got the same passion to improve the way that the NHS functions, to make it more efficient, to make it much more modern, and in the same way that we benefit from immediate, almost instant delivery in many cases now in our personal lives. You can order groceries that arrive in to your home in 15 minutes in some cases, using some of these apps and delivery mechanisms that are out there. But why is it that the healthcare industry, where it's probably a bit more important to get a lab test turned around in 15 minutes than it is to get your lettuce, why is it that the healthcare industry doesn't necessarily have such easy access at such cheap rates in a sustainable fashion? And so we've the pain that Chris and I felt while in training as medics was that we would often get asked by our consultants to go and chase blood results. We would go to the pathology laboratory, we would ask, and we would be told quite flippantly, go back to your consultant and tell them that I don't even know, from the laboratory scientist, because they don't even know once that sample has, what a lot of people don't fully appreciate, and that's including medics, is that a lot of hospitals don't actually do many tests on site. They deliver them to hubs where the specialist equipment is in that hub, and all of the district general hospitals that are further away only have some of the core critical testing capabilities, but some of the more specialized stuff is done in the central locations. And these samples are going through either really intense traffic in London rush hour, or they're going 40, 50 kilometers up a motorway. You get delays. They don't often know where that sample is. It's not traceable quite often. And so planning and providing care for your patients can become slow. It can become a bit agonizing. And then it's just worth mentioning that my background also is, I'm originally from Afghanistan. So drones were always at the forefront of my mind 4 or 5 years ago, for the wrong reasons. They were, I would come home from university, I'd come home from medical school, and I would hear that drone strike has killed X, drone strike has killed Y number of people in back home. And I'd always think about, well, isn't it quite funny and uncanny how you can use these incredible bits of technology, which they are in that sense, to do quite some not so incredible stuff. You can control them from very far away and deliver payloads extremely precisely, or not so precisely. So why is it that we can deliver bombs and death and destruction, but we can't deliver blood and save someone's life? It didn't make sense. And so when Chris and I were essentially coming to form this idea of how can we improve access to healthcare, that's what it was all about, improving access to healthcare. It made absolute sense. Hey, hang on a second, why don't we use this already existing technology, but for some good? We've done quite a few things over the last couple of years, pre-COVID and during COVID, as you can imagine. But to briefly explain who we are in a bit more detail, we're not a drone company. We don't build drones and we don't fly drones. In some ways, we couldn't care less about the drones. Now we do. We care a lot. We're massive drone enthusiasts. But the point is that the exact kind of color of the drone or the type of drone, as long as it meets the standards that are one day going to be set by the CEO, indeed are currently set, it doesn't matter. As long as it fulfills the job and is the right drone for the right use case, it doesn't matter. In the same way that, Uber doesn't drive a car or build your car. What it does is it connects an incredibly fragmented supply to an incredibly fragmented demand. And it's essentially a platform that enables you to access, as the user, a whole host of different people in terms of cabs. The same goes for Deliveroo and Airbnb and all of these kinds of software. We are the same, but for the drone industry and the healthcare industry, so that NHS hospitals, GP pharmacies, warehouses, community care, whether they be tertiary sites, whether they be care homes, pharmaceutical companies, medical device manufacturers, it doesn't matter. They just want to be able to log into a platform and say, I need something to be delivered between A and B, and for that to be managed. They don't want to be thinking one day, I'm going to work with this drone company, the other day I'm going to work with that drone company. What happens if one doesn't have permission here, there? And on the other side, you also don't want these drone companies, from our experience, don't want to be dealing with all the different difficult mechanisms of the NHS and how fragmented it is. So there's definitely this space that we have found that is critical in order for the healthcare system to actually truly get the most out of these drones, is to have this middle management system. We have a whole host of projects that we've done, are currently doing and will be doing. Most notably is some of the work that we did in the Solent. Last year, we flew the world's first chemotherapy, monoclonal antibodies in a bag, liquid form. And we also flew the UK's first prescription-only medicine in partnership with Boots. And that was particularly, a particularly worthy area to support, because it's, the Isle of Wight is one of the most deprived areas in the south of England. People tend to think the south of England obviously is a bit more wealthy, a bit more well off and affluent than the north, but actually the Isle of Wight is particularly deprived, and their access to the mainland is their lifeblood. Patients with brain cancer have to go and travel to get their chemotherapy from the Isle of Wight, take a ferry, take a hovercraft over to Portsmouth. They have to stay overnight in a hotel that's provided by the NHS, paid for by the NHS, receive the treatment. They have to then go back the next day. They often have to be accompanied, most likely are accompanied by a relative or a close friend. And so you can imagine that in a situation where some poor individual unfortunately receives the news that they've got cancer, and they're not on a particularly wealthy income, and they have to pay for the most expensive waterway in the world to go and get their life-saving chemotherapy, it's not particularly the nicest thing to have to worry about when you've just been told that you've got cancer and all you want to do is be in your home to receive that cancer care. So it was really, really heartwarming to see some of the work that we did was able to improve, and hopefully will improve, because it was a pilot study. It wasn't permanent. No one's trying things permanently at the moment in time. That we could make a massive difference to some of these people's lives. And the same goes for other places around the country, incredibly so in Northumbria, where Louisa will talk more about some of the work that we did, but very much trying to deliver pathology samples for those cancer patients so that they could receive their treatments on time. If their blood samples were a bit skewed, then of course the cancer, the treatment would have to be delayed. But to know that sooner rather than later, so that you're not stuck waiting for hours and hours in a hospital room, only to be told after a couple of hours, sorry, your blood results mean you can't have that treatment, go home. Why? It shouldn't be like that.
Just on the
go on, Louisa.
Just on the Solent as well, just to give people some figures around kind of the travel times on the Solent. So the another example of the use case is where chemotherapy is made in Portsmouth and then transferred across to St Mary's on the Isle of Wight for people to have treatment over there. That travel route, if you're not familiar with the area, has to go via taxi and then the hovercraft and then a taxi to the hospital. Because of the range of kind of different variances in that can take between 3 to 4 hours. A drone operating between the two sites could take about 32 minutes. So it's quickly to see what that can mean. And that doesn't necessarily mean, right, okay, something's quicker and therefore it's more efficient. This is around individuals not having to go into hospital, having their tests and then go home or come back later. This is around a quick turnaround so that they could actually receive the treatment on the same day quickly. And also chemotherapy can be made bespoke to those individuals, and therefore it's not wasted if it has to depart before those individuals have had their test results back. So it's around all of that ecosystem as well, not necessarily just like to be faster for the sake of being faster. It's around actually the impact it has to the patients.
Absolutely. And one of the key so in the NHS long-term plan, which some of you may well be familiar with, it's absolutely a prerogative of the NHS to centralise a lot of these services, whether they be pathology in central hubs, whether it be the manufacturing of chemotherapy, because it's more cost effective. It means you have much higher standards of care. It means you can have a lot of more expertise in one specific location. But with that, if you centralise some of these services, those people who eventually will be living the furthest away from those central services are going to be obviously more negatively impacted. So if we do want to centralize these services for the benefit of the NHS for many reasons, then we also need really good logistics. And current logistics just simply does not allow for the NHS to achieve some of its dreams, essentially. It's just worth touching on some of the other projects that we've got going on. So in London, we're hoping to deliver pathology samples in the highly urban environment in central London, which I know will be potentially quite shocking for some people, but actually just because you're in central London does not mean that you're not subjected to massive amounts of delays due to traffic congestion and slow speeds in these areas. A really good example of that is that when a donor for an organ becomes available from a donor, that organ needs to be type matched incredibly quickly so that it can then be utilized. You don't want that organ just sitting around you want to match that to someone and deliver it to someone and transplant it in someone as soon as possible, or someone who's waiting on that organ donor list. Now, some of those samples to type match to make sure that you've matched with someone, they need to be delivered and analyzed within an hour. But you don't get to decide where that person is donating that kidney if they've just passed away and they're donating it. So you might have to end up going from quite a far away district general hospital to a central location in London. And if you're unable to match that organ, get that sample delivered in time to be analyzed in time, you're slowing down that matching process, and you're actually reducing the quality of that organ. And it means you're also then reducing the quality of care for that patient, because they're at high risk of transplant rejection and all these things. So just because it's not just the rural areas and the isolated areas that are subjected to difficult challenges and logistics, it's also the highly urban areas too. It's everywhere. So London as well. We're also trying to do some work with the Northwest Ambulance Service, and some interesting work there on delivering defibrillators, particularly in the Lake District, and delivering emergency supplies for the emergency services and the first responders there. We're talking to some trusts who are on the outskirts of London, delivering chemotherapy from some manufacturing sites which are in Oxford, and having essentially that kind of air bridge into London. And then we've got a few other locations that are to be announced, but one of them is delivering medical devices. So you've got a whole range. You've got pathology, you've got blood packs, you've got samples for organ matching, you've got medical devices, you've got emergency equipment. It's a whole spectrum. The whole industry can definitely benefit from a faster, more smarter, more green logistics system. So to dive a bit deeper into our work with Northumbria, you can see that Northumbria is one of the most dispersed trusts in the entire country. It covers a huge geography, and 2,500 square miles, all the way from North Tyneside up until the border with Scotland and Berwick. And so, as you can see, Berwick is quite isolated. Hot Whistle is similarly somewhat isolated, and so these items that have to be delivered from, whether it's Wansbeck General Hospital, or whether it's from a manufacturing plant that's near Newcastle, to get it up to Berwick, it's a bit of a challenge when you're stuck behind a tractor and it's just a single lane A road. And that points to some of the work that we have done and will continue to be doing. So we flew for 3 months, but it was specifically to look at how we could deliver chemotherapy more quickly and blood samples for those cancer patients, as Louisa mentioned. And it was also to utilize this 3-month trial to really nail down what is the environmental impact, what is the environmental benefit, what are those economic benefits, and what are those health benefits. Because it's all well and good to be able to say it's going to be faster, it's going to be better, but let's actually evaluate it. Let's bring some data to the game so that we can prove and determine how beneficial this is. And we've gone over some of those healthcare goals about making things faster, reducing waste, and giving that added flexibility and resilience to the NHS. Louise, over to you to talk more about what we did.
Yeah, so Northumbria, just as the use case, this is kind of the one I spoke about that Andy saw at RF Leeming. And so some of you will be familiar with the airspace. I'm sure some of you won't necessarily be familiar, but hopefully you'll still appreciate some of the stuff that we're talking about. So we were looking to operate between Wansbeck, Alnwick and Berwick, which is along the coast. And we conducted that using a temporary danger area. I'm going to assume that most of you understand some of these terms. If there's anything that I talk about, then please just flag if I don't say the acronym correctly. There's so many different acronyms, isn't there, in aviation, that I tend to get some of them confused myself. So we conducted that between the 13th of February and the 12th of May this year, and it was Monday to Friday flying, and we participated in the CAP 1616 airspace change process with the Civil Aviation Authority. I see one of the questions was how long did it take to get us approved BVLOS flights? For this trial, we operated with Skyports. They were our drone operator. And apologies if some of you already know this, but there's 2 approvals that you really need to get to be able to do this. It's the airspace requirement of the segregated airspace and the operational safety case, which is essentially the CAA certificate signing off to say that their Skyports can fly and operate in that area. Both of those procedures, we started our airspace change request in May of 2022, and we were flying in February 2023. So I think that gives a good indication. The operational safety case was, I think, started around September. I'd have to check my dates, but around September, and it has to align with the airspace change request as well. So we put those both through, and as part of that airspace change request, we go out to lots of our stakeholders, hopefully including some of yourselves, and ask for feedback and to get some insights into what might be causing issues by us flying there. We then take that information and adjust appropriately our temporary danger area and discuss with the Civil Aviation Authority, and all the stakeholder engagement is fed back to them as well. Because of the operations that we were conducting in this area, we're obviously looking to fly low, which probably doesn't necessarily help some of you individuals on the call. So we're looking to fly, well, we did fly around 400 feet. So we have some buffers around that drone route so that we can ensure the safety of other airspace users who might be flying closely to the top of our temporary danger area. We separated it into 3 regions so that we had allowance to let others go through different airspace if they needed to and needed to request it. And we also worked really closely with the emergency services, as you can imagine, and the military, and also Newcastle Airport, which I'm sure you'd like to think that we did, given how close we were travelling to their control zone. We had local agreements with the Great North Air Ambulance Service, the military, as I said, Coast Guard, and the police to ensure that they can access the temporary danger area as quickly as possible. We're not here to get in the way of anyone. We are trying to just conduct our flight and our operations. I appreciate we have a temporary danger area, but we do want to be as flexible as possible. So there were a couple of examples where Great North Air Ambulance Services did need quick access to the airspace, and we could vacate. Our maximum time of vacation was 10 minutes. So that gave them suitable time to fly from their location, and that's coordinated centrally anyway. Newcastle Airport supported us on our trial as well. There's actually something called the safety buffer policy for anyone who's particularly interested in some of the policy documents that go around and support this information. And it limits the access to drones around control zones and control areas. And therefore, Newcastle supported us to get dispensation to have that safety buffer policy removed for our operations, which we were successful getting as well, which is why we can operate so close to their control zone. As I said, and as Hamid said, we're drone operator agnostic. So Skyports were our drone operator for these operations. They could, let me just get my actual document so I'll quote it correctly. The maximum payload for their aircraft was about 3 kilos, and they would operate at around 60 knots. And as I said, 400 feet is the type of the way that they fly. We did have some challenges during the operations. There was a huge amount of learnings from any projects. We are still in development phases, and that's really important to make sure that we're stressing. Some of these trials that we're doing is gathering data, both on the healthcare side and the aviation side as well. And anyone who lives in Northumbria, obviously some of the weather over those months was a little bit windy, especially off the coast, where actually over land it was probably okay, but because we're operating off the coast, it was more windy, and therefore we had limitations of 27 knots for our flights, and therefore if it gained more than that, which it did on a few days, that meant that we needed to ground operations, and we obviously would cancel the temporary danger area if we weren't going to be operating on that day. A large amount of the project was covering healthcare validation. Hamid can correct me and change it if I'm getting this wrong, but essentially what we were doing was some validation testing with the hospitals, and that was around kind of sending pathology or bloods via land and then via the drone, so that the pathology teams could actually examine both specimens and see whether it's producing the same results. So there's a number of testings that we needed to do that. We also tested the temperature. There's quite a few, as you can imagine, medical things that need to be kept at a certain temperature, so that was also part of our trial. So some of the things that we were looking at were really as we've talked about, healthcare linked, but sometimes are missed or misunderstood or represented by kind of just what the trial looks like on a piece of paper. So it's really great to have these opportunities to explain why we were doing them, and when you start talking about some of the things that we did, it's quite obvious why you would like to make sure that people are doing those tests before you have any interaction with the NHS.
Yeah.
We also looked at kind of multimodal as well. So we are not here to say that drones are the answer to everything. We want to look at a multimodal. Sometimes there will be situations where, like I said, where the weather is too extreme, where we will need to use roads. And so APN is looking at all those opportunities, and also looking at how you would decide which way is the best to taking into account a number of different things. And we also did some blood trials with the NHS Blood and Transport as well, which Hamid, you might be able to share any more on that if you wanted to.
Yeah, and just to touch briefly on that integration, a lot of people think, okay, great, you're flying for the NHS. It's as simple as, you know, just putting a drone on site and putting something in there and flying. It's not. NHS hospital environments are incredibly complex, incredibly busy. To actually fully set out the procedures of booking a drone, putting a request in, getting that request fulfilled, putting the sample into the package, getting it put into the right location, and then all down on the other side is actually a monumental task. It is not as simple as just put it in the drone and it flies off. So if we want drones to be something that is used by the NHS as a useful asset, it needs to be integrated fully, and it needs to be integrated seamlessly. And that was a whole body of work that we've done. And we're going to be continuing to do that because it's not finished. And so, as Louisa said, sometimes that's missed and not necessarily appreciated how much work is involved in that. But yeah, if we quickly move on, conscious of time, these are just some of the statistics associated with the flights that we did. We did 240 flights delivered. And some of the keen-eyed amongst you might be looking at the bottom right-hand corner of the post. That is not general post. I might want to quickly add that is hospital post. Those are discharge letters, you know, patient. Those are related to the hospitals. But yes, if based on those flights, the equivalent ground journey time that was removed was over 175 hours, which is enough time to drive from Wandsbeck Hospital in the north to London 32 times over those 240 flights. So you can imagine, as you can see, the impact that can have on removing carbon, the same amount of carbon dioxide that was absorbed by 62 trees in a year. That would have been the equivalent for those flights. So the impact that can have on sustainability is huge, because these are electric drones. Louise, you want to talk on the next stage?
Yeah, so as Hamid alluded to, we're talking about next stage, and the Northumberland NHS Foundation Trust are really keen to look at how this progresses, what goes forward. I'm sure some of you will be following kind of the aviation aspects on this, and there's some real challenges around how do we integrate rather than segregate? How do we make sure we don't always need TDAs in the future? You know, as I said before, none of us really particularly want TDAs, and we appreciate that they are, you know, taking airspace, to say the least. So we're looking at the next stage. We have an airspace change request that's currently going through, although we are very much at the early stages, and so we haven't actually started our formal stakeholder engagement on this yet, and we're just reevaluating the timelines. But essentially it's looking to expand kind of some routes, looking at how we'd actually fly in controlled airspace as well, and working very closely with Newcastle. And then also looking at the healthcare side, how you operate and look and deliver to more smaller hospitals that don't necessarily have so much of the infrastructure that some of the larger ones do. Also, we'd really like to look at GPs and care homes, but again, we're just evaluating what we can achieve given the current regulations and making sure that we can, you know, we're not running before we can walk. So we're just in those information. You know, it's all on the Airspace Change portal. You can log on to it, and you know, we can include any of you in the feedback as well, and also we can share it with the group as well, so people can share feedback. This is really around us working out how we integrate. You know, it's not necessarily helpful if no one comments. It's great to have feedback, and sometimes there are challenges where we need to work out how we can do things. I would say as well, given this forum, actually, if we're working in temporary danger areas and you see that and you want to do some flying, it's really important that you just pick up the phone to the numbers that's on the NOTAMs, because there are times where actually, you know, that's the whole point of why we have allocated like different areas, because actually we might be operating in one and we can let you fly in another, for example. So it's all up to the operator around their processes around that. But please, and also if you do request, then we do obviously log it, and then we're looking at how we can integrate it better in the future. But yeah, so that's ongoing, as well as some other projects, which I'm hoping, you know, feel free to follow us on all the social medias, and then you can find out what we're up to.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Bang on time. Mark and Andy, over to you.
Yeah, well, thank you very much indeed. Can I come in? The first question I've got to ask, and it's one of these obvious ones for some, and where do you actually land, and where do you take off from? You know, in terms of, you know, well, I'll let you answer that rather than me try to assume.
So ideally, we would like to land on the hospital sites or on the site. Obviously, some real challenges around the regulation side of that. We don't have certified drones at the moment in the UK. There are some going on overseas around certification of things. So for this project, we worked very closely with the council, who are actually very helpful in trying to locate some of the sites for us to land. For example, near Wansbeck, which was really to the south, we landed in part of the local museum, which is just across the road. But actually, you can imagine all those 5 minutes added on does actually impact the whole point of doing this. In the Solent trial, we had approval to land on the helipads, and we worked really closely with the local HEMS to operate how we're going to do that. Some future projects we're looking at like helipads or off slightly as well. There's pros and cons to landing on a helipad site, obviously, and we have got we don't want to risk causing any not damage, but like if we broke down, we need to move it, for example. So ideally, we can. It depends on the drone as well, I would say. So there are some drones out there that need a short runway. So some of the larger ones that you may have seen, who are doing some really good work, they need a runway or short runway. Some are can take off vertical, some need to just go forward. So there is a variety, and it depends on what the drone is. Sorry if that's not a very helpful answer.
No, look, I mean, it was just for me, it was one that was shouting at me. I can't, you know, is it going to land in my back garden if I need some chemotherapy and it's at home? You know, is it, or does it have to land, you know, and it was just really that, or does it land at the local hospital and then it's brought from the local hospital? It was trying to think of the logistics. I
think in the future, like if we look in long-term future, the idea would be that it would deliver more locally to you, either in your home if it's suitable, or like your garden if it's suitable, or a local GP. But we're really not there on the kind of regulatory side at the moment, and the aircraft, the drone, they can achieve.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Right, I'll go through a couple of these questions here. Graham Laurie, how many drones does Appian have and pilots? If it's a growing company, what are the job opportunities for pilots?
Sounds like he's looking for a job.
Please tell me to work here.
Yeah, so I think that question came in probably just before we explained. Yeah, so we're not a drone company. We don't have own, you know, these drones. We subcontract and work with the right drone company for the right use case, and it's quite often the case that that a single drone company cannot fulfill all of the requirements for a single even NHS trust. And so even within one geography, you'll have a situation where you need multiple drone companies to be fulfilling that service and the requirements there.
And just to follow on from that as well, like some drones can do short distances with light payloads, some can do longer with larger payloads, so it really varies. I saw that question somewhere else as well. It really depends. So the one that we were doing for Skyports could fly with 3 kilos, but there are some that can carry less and more.
Yeah. Graham's just put in the chat that he's not looking for a job, but he has put "yet!" exclamation mark.
Darren Wood asks, what was the corridor width of your TDA, your temporary danger area?
You're testing me now. I think
approximately within a few centimeters will do fine.
I have to check. I think it was 2 nautical miles wide, and that's based on lots of calculations to do with the drone and making sure that we sometimes do calculations around how quickly people's reactions would be to see it and avoid it. Those types of things are taken into account. So there is a safety calculate, like there's lots of information that's taken on board to calculate that. We try to make it as obviously as narrow as possible, but again, we do need to make sure that we've got enough for it to potentially return to base if it's needed to, or something like that, or to vacate an area quickly for HEMS or something like we just mentioned.
Thank you.
Can I take the one that's just come in? I like that question. Dave Phipps has said, are regulators an obstruction or facilitators for progress?
Can I give you a bit of background before you answer that? He is our CEO, if you don't already know that. And he knows everything about this because he's written the manual on it for many. But yes, please answer that one. It'd be lovely to hear
from him. It'd be helpful.
We love working with the Civil Aviation Authority. Look, I from my background as the NHS, the NHS is a humongous organization, and it can be quite slow to react and do things. But that's the very nature of what happens when you're so huge. And so we appreciate that the CAA, likewise, when it's, healthcare and aviation are very, very similar in a lot of ways. We both are incredibly focused on safety first, patient safety and pilot safety first. We are all about checks and checks again. The surgical checklist that surgeons perform prior to putting the knife on that skin, the scalpel on the skin, is inspired by the WHO checklist, as it's known, is inspired by the pilot checklist. That's where it comes from. And so both organizations are also somewhat quite similar. They're both very regulated, and they both take time to implement innovations. And so we appreciate that. And we can see that the CAA is doing its absolute best to, modify some of these policies so that they're more accommodating and fair for everyone using the airspace. But we really like working with the CAA. We think that they could do with more resources from the government, as can basically any public sector body probably. So yeah, we like working with the CAA, and we're there to support them and help them also in their journey, as well as also on our journey.
Yeah, well, just to follow on from that, we actually work very closely with the CAA Innovation part of the organisation, which, for those who aren't aware, is relatively new. I think it was set up in 2019. I'd have to check my dates on those. But essentially, they sit slightly separately from the regulated side to ensure there's obviously no bias in any applications. But they're actually there to help support and facilitate some of the discussions that we have, and look at how we can potentially do things in the future, how we can make considerations, what do we need to do on those types of things. We work with them. APN has resources allocated to us that we pay for to ensure that we can help have that as well. And I think the innovation, how even setting up that innovation team shows the CAA's kind of positioning about how to move some of this forward. And again, I'm sure some of you will be familiar with the airspace modernisation strategy, which is now clear about where new airspace users sit, whereas I think maybe I think the last one 2018 or something like that didn't necessarily reference it so prominently, and so I think there is a real turn in the last maybe 4 or 5 years from the whole sector, but DFT and CAA around how we should move this forward. So I think they have a hard job, but also, just to get on my level, this is what I constantly saying to everyone, which is they're there to regulate. That is their job. We can't expect them to be they're not the ones that should be innovating. They're there to regulate and ensure that we're all safe. And so we need to make sure that we're supporting them with how we want to innovate and how we're taking things forwards, while still preserving what is basically the history and why aviation is where it is. So it's a hard job for them to do, but they are making really good progress.
Graham Laurie again asks, what are the potential savings for the NHS? Obviously, you had a short thing, but I mean, should we just extend that sort of long term? What's your aspirations for this? Because obviously, you've demonstrated that you're more than twice as efficient in terms of certain things in that short time. It'd be interesting to know long term what you're thinking.
So I will provide some numbers, but before I do, when a patient is receiving palliative care because they're at the end of their life, and they need morphine because they're in incredible amounts of pain, and you want to treat that patient and give them their pain relief as they're on their deathbed, essentially, no amount of money. That is providing that good quality of care as they're passing away. Everyone should have a dignified and painless death. That is it. You can't put a number to that. Right. So yes, we will provide numbers, and we have done a lot of calculations, and it's not just us. There's huge organizations that have done deep dives into the economics of drones, and because it's clearly a growing market and people are interested in it. But you've got to understand that this isn't just about making, savings here for the NHS. It's also about delivering better care for the patients of our country who deserve it. But more to the data point, a good economic report was recently published by McKinsey about particularly last mile delivery, and they said that if drone operators could eventually manage 20 drones per pilot simultaneously, then their analysis, using quite reasonable assumptions, suggested that a single package delivery would end up costing anywhere between £1.50 and £2, dollars, $1.50 to $2, which is incredible when you realize that my trust that I was working at was getting charged £150 to move one single sample on an urgent call out basis. So this is 100 times cheaper, which is nuts. And to put that into perspective, that is in line with the per package cost for an electric car delivering up to 5 packages, and any type of van delivering 100 packages in a milk run format if they deliver it all in one run. So huge amounts of savings, and it's not just about the cost; it's about the time saving. It means that there's reliability, as Louisa mentioned in the work that we've been doing. It's about saving waste. It's about making things more sustainable. And not having to stock things on shelves because you can get them reliably and on time. So there's an immense amount of savings to be made in many areas. When you're centralizing resources, you can have less of them. You can have it in one area. So it is monetary, but it's not just necessarily purely how much did that literal delivery cost versus how much did that literal delivery cost. You can't compare an apple to an orange. You've got one situation where you're just comparing a delivery, but on the other side, you're comparing a delivery that has so many ripple and knock-on effects to the improvement that provides, and not only to the patient, but it's in the entire system as a whole. So bear that in mind.
Absolutely.
I think the priceless bit that I think that you mentioned is the improving the quality of care for the patient, isn't it? And you can't put a price on that, can you?
Thank you. Peter Cox asked, would a multi-rotor quad type be more practical than a fixed wing type? Louisa's nodding there.
It can be. It can be depending on the situation and the payload. So there are multi-rotor quad types but the payload may differ in the length. So some of the flights that we did in the Northumbria phase 1 were up to 80 kilometers. So some just haven't got that kind of distance at the moment, so it is a bit of a challenge, but it will be in certain situations, which is why we just work with everyone.
I assume some of them are like hybrids, so sort of fixed wing but the ability to take off and land vertically. So
yeah,
that's hybrid.
Exactly happened with just the one that we were flying in this case. It took off vertically and then moved to a flight forward.
Quite impressive. Be nice to see that one flying. Graham Stanley, do the aircraft have IP rating for rain, cloud, fog, etc.? That's
Do you mean when you say IP?
I think a waterproofing. It means
really waterproof.
Yeah, it's about a waterproofing. But the answer is yes, I know. But it's if you know anything, I guess.
So some of them. So there is definitely a move from the CAA on this one where they need to have IP rating. There are quite a lot of operators that can fly in everything. The challenge around that is actually, as you'll all be familiar with, is some of the current regulations. And so for example, in this flights, we had a requirement that cloud-based had to be 1,500 feet. We actually were only operating, if you can remember from the slide, our TDA was up to 850. That was actually around ensuring that kind of if HEMS, and for example, the weather came in and they had to go down, because obviously they've got approval to fly a lot lower than most people, that they still had the space to be able to do that. So some of the limitations that we self-imposed was around ensuring the safety of others in the airspace.
Thank you. David Bosmans, Is all the airspace organisation taken on by Appian, or is it a collaboration with the operators such as Skyports?
So we've done both. So previously on the Solent one we mentioned last year, actually that was conducted by Skylift, were our partners down there. And so this one we kind of led. There is a huge amount of input from Skyports into that. Some of the agreements I talked about need to be directly with the drone operator rather than through ourselves. So obviously the drone operator has local agreements with HEMS and procedures in place, which we kind of supported. Skyports have their own airspace change processes in place as well. They're conducting flights up and down the country. So you might have seen them reference on airspace change portal as well. So it's a bit of both really. In this instance, we led the airspace change.
Thank you. Barry Gregory, just moved again, sorry. Is the location of the destination site and landing based on GPS alone, or does the landing also use video?
So for this instinct, it's so they use GPS, but they also the landing pad is taken by video. So like, as in it just has a sensors that kind of land on it.
Yeah. It has a QR code. The
Yeah.
pad has a QR code, so once it reaches a specific height and the appropriate, once it literally reaches the spot above it's supposed to land based on GPS, it uses GPS all the way through, but then it locks on to the pad itself to make sure it lands on it rather than, you know, a meter that way or a meter that way. It lands on the QR code.
We did talk about earlier on whether we might. I will ask Skyports whether they're able to do a similar presentation for you, which you can talk to more detail.
That will be fantastic to find out.
We'll have to see if we can invite them to do it. What about inviting them live to Buckminster and see if they'll drop a drone down for us?
Yeah,
we like those sort of demonstrations. David Laurie, what sort of intelligence is in the drone? If a headwind unexpectedly slows down ground speed, are there strategies that the drone will use to return to base or land somewhere else or crash in the sea? Quite important question.
So again, I'll probably answer as much as I can, and purely just from my knowledge, and each drone is different. This is where it's sometimes confusing for some of us who've been in the aviation sector for a while, which is a lot of them aren't controlled in the same way as we consider it being controlled. It's normally a system that's controlling it. There are a huge amount of mitigations. Crashing into the sea would be absolutely the last resort, but there are different aspects of it where it will return to base. If the headwind, we had that happen in this trial, the headwind was more than the forecasts were predicting, and we used a number of different forecasts and different systems to predict the weather. The headwind was too strong, and so it returned to base, and that's what happens. There are a number of strategies, and it's also geofenced within the area of the temporary danger area. So essentially, sometimes it's quite hard to get your head around, but outside the temporary danger area does not exist to that drone, so it can't fly out of it. It just does not exist, which I always find quite strange to get my head around, but that's essentially what it is.
We get that one. I think many of us who have flown drones sort of understand the geofencing side of things, and sometimes you do get a bit caught out at times. So Barry Gregory, what is the range between the drone controlling base and destination site?
So this one was operated from Westcott, which is near Coventry. So it was flown up and down the coast. We had Skyports team members on site on each of the landing locations for a number of reasons, and but it was flown from Westcott, which I should really know how far away that is, but we can look on a map.
It's near Oxford. So
a couple of hundred miles, 250, 300 miles potentially, then up to
exactly
Northumberland. Yeah,
a lot of LiPo charge there, Andy, I think.
Yeah.
Trevor Waters, we were waiting for Amazon to be mentioned. Amazon have been thinking of delivering parcels to houses by drones. It may be worth a chat with them.
Yes, they've been thinking about delivering parcels to houses using drones for a long time now, and I think everyone kind of laughs when you hear about how they said that they were going to be doing Amazon Air, I think it was, or something, many years ago. I think it was back in 2018, in fact, when they announced it, and obviously it never happened. But again, we're not interested in that. We're interested in delivering medicines and healthcare products and helping improve the patient helping improve patient outcomes. Don't really care about delivering a book.
Yeah, I think your course
I
is
think us as
far greater.
consumers need to be a little bit more patient and be prepared to wait a day for things. not want them within half an hour.
The last question we've got on here at the moment is Darren Wood. Were the drone flight paths planned and then flown autonomously, or did the drone pilot control it all the way? You've answered that one, but if there's anything else you want to add to that, and
I'll just say there's different. Again, not for this example. Obviously, it was pre-planned, and they would control it and make sure it's still safe and monitor it. And there's a way of doing it. There are other drone operators that I would say that, and there are flights overseas where people are flying more than one drone to a person, so it's very much autonomous and not necessarily remotely piloted, as so to speak, by the technical terms. So yeah, it is.
I mean, one of the things that
they still have, I should say, they still have, they still need to, ensure they still have, they literally have, it's very simple. I'm sure that you're the same like, checklists of what they need to do to certain points, flip charts, exactly the same as aircrew would have. So it's very much derived from the aviation side and that's so they do have overriding functions all the time.
I can imagine that a number of people in the room listening and that would have a concern that there could be overuse of the airspace. There could be a point where even this wonderful cause. I mean, I've got absolutely no issues with the cause here. What you're doing, I think it's marvelous, and it's one of the best things I've heard for the use of drones in a long, long time. But if there are hundreds and thousands of corridors, because you become very, very, and others may well take on board a similar tack and do that, does it completely lock up airspace for others? And the hobbyists, the sport flyers, the competition flyers, potentially. And that's, I imagine there are people in the room thinking that. And it's just something I'll put out there. And I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are on it.
Yeah, so lots of people talking about temporary TMZs, temporary transponder mandatory zones, because there's so many temporaries. And so that's one way of looking at it. I think there's still some communication probably needed around that, in a sense of it's not the same as controlled airspace where you have, yes, you have to be visible, but it might be a drone has to vacate your position, and therefore you can just do whatever you want, and the drone needs to avoid you. Then there are probably a number of layers that will determine, like the detect and avoid site that gets mentioned a lot of times. I don't think that that's why I keep kind of saying around the temporary danger area, it's not a solution that anyone's kind of working towards. I think if we go to permanent danger areas, then we're going to be kind of really making the system quite clunky and not really where it should be. Again, without talking about over some other places in Europe, there's a lot going on in new space with looking below kind of 500 feet. What does that look like? Again, I appreciate that might not help necessarily the people on the call in that aspect, but I think we need to more look at how detect and avoid. I think whether EC is a positive thing that could help the safety as well. I mean, I have my own opinion on that from my air traffic days on how much that might support. And as Andy know, we listened to some really interesting discussion in the aircrew side around transponders and stuff like that, and how that might improve safety. So I think there are a number of things that can help prevent us from just blocking routes, because I don't think that's really what anyone particularly wants to do.
Yeah.
No, thank you very much.
And we're actually doing some pretty exciting work on modelling how many drones the NHS would need in order to be able to, do X amount of deliveries per day to X amount of sites, and doing the mathematics behind that. So, and actually you realise we're a tiny country, and you don't need all that much. We're not as big as the States, certainly. So, but yes, obviously that doesn't mean that the space is smaller, but we are known to be good at sharing, and sharing is caring. So very much a case where we are empathetically and conscientiously making sure that we are integrating into the airspace. We are not here barging the way through, going, get out of our way. No, not at all. It's the total opposite. We are very much trying to to make sure that everyone on this call feels like that they are able to access their airspace no differently to when drones are up in the air one day on a regular basis.
Mhm.
Thank you.
I mean, we are a tiny country, but there is actually a huge amount of airspace there. And personally, I don't think the challenges are that great so that we can all share it safely. I think, as I mentioned earlier, model flying is, because generally, especially for flying in the clubs, it's almost a ground hazard rather than an airspace hazard, because you've a fixed takeoff and landing point. So you take off and you land at the same spot. So it's almost you could drop a dome over the model flying field of, say, I don't know, 500-meter dome, and then nothing gets any further away from that. So it's almost a fixed location. So, and we have been doing work with various trials on making things as conspicuous as they can. But there's a fair way to go. But ultimately, sharing airspace safely is what everybody's goal is, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And we get used to it. That's what we do. So it's the question was there, really putting it out there, because there will be people asking that. So Eugene Anker, one of our regulars, I don't think he's missed a session.
No.
So he says, "What do you
question,
do?"
This one.
This is an interesting question. If you're reading it and smiling, grinning, what do you do to stop the drone being hijacked for the drugs?
Okay, blimey. Well, obviously, when the application goes to the Civil Aviation Authority, they're making sure that all the software, all the technical systems, all the protection systems, all the security systems behind the operations and the drone itself and the control mechanisms behind it are going to be meeting their safety standards. And if I'm not mistaken, Louisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but after I've forgotten the technical term for it. I know the medical equivalent, but the equivalent of like a CQC inspection, but for the aviation authorities, found that it might have been an ICAO inspection or something. Forgive me. Found that the CA is the strictest aviation authority in the world, or at least of those that they analysed. So I'm quite confident that when the CA lets something fly, that it's very, very safe. Other than that, you obviously don't tell people, hey, look at me, I'm flying a drone full of really expensive stuff. And at the end of the day, flying controlled drugs and all of those sorts of medications is a whole different ball game. We're focused on things like blood samples and blood packs and things that people don't.
We also like, you need to compare it to what is utilized at the moment. So actually, kind of things are transferred or at the moment, and no one's kind of hijacking cars and stuff trying to get the drugs. So there's also a comparison against what we currently do that we need to think about as well, and that kind of comparison is really helpful when we're looking at, again, like procedures and handover of, certain people can only handle certain equipment, medical equipment as well. And so that's kind of some of the stuff that we're looking at as well, dangerous goods, for example, and things like that, around how we transport them safely. All those things are kind of been looked at, but Hamid's main point was around the communication systems of the aircraft, which go through significant testing.
I think the short answer for Eugene was it'd be easier for him to hijack a van with the drugs in than the drone, if that's what he's planning.
I mean,
I've just seen Peter's comment. Yes, please do, Peter, and let us know. Actually, get in touch with us through our hello@apian.aero, our website, or social media. Let us know how that conversation goes, because actually one of the really beautiful aspects of coming and talking to you folk is that you guys tell us that there are problems in your local areas, and there are ways that you guys can benefit and your local communities can benefit from such technology. So let us know if you guys would like us to explore that with you.
Thank you. Well, look,
Peter's actually across in the States. He's one of our regular viewers. He stays up all night just to watch us.
I see. Pelham County. Yeah.
And I think on behalf of the BMFA, obviously we will keep in touch with you. We've really enjoyed this. I've learned a huge amount. I'm quite excited about this evening. It's something completely fresh for us and so worthy. Total respect for what you're actually trying to do and what you're doing actually and achieve. And the questions just give you a flavour that actually I think 99.9% are all for it. They can see the benefit here. completely outweighs any issues that could arise. And we'd like to keep in touch with you. And
they're all issues that can be dealt with, I think,
absolutely,
relatively simply.
Absolutely right.
Proportional ways of dealing with these things.
And hopefully we can get you back on shortly or in due course, and because we'd love to hear how things are progressing, because I'm sure they're going to go brilliantly well for you and continue that way. And there's lots of applause going on in the background, and the chat, if you dare look at it, is I'm sure it's all saying all good things as it usually does. Andy might read a few out in a moment as we sort of close down. But again, thank you, and just keep up the great work, and we'll keep in touch with you. And if you ever need any assistance from us lowly model flyers, again, we've got a huge amount of expertise here, so where to contact Andy and our team.
Thank you.
Really helpful.
Really appreciate
I have to echo Mark's comments. That was fantastic. So thank you both for that. Louise, you'll have the joy or otherwise of me doing the presentation to the Airspace group next time round about model flying. So I'll try and make it as interesting as yours.